How dare you? The billionaire forced his way in, then froze at the sight of the twins. What he did next, no one could imagine. Rain struck the narrow stretch of coastline like it had something to prove. It came down in hard sheets, rattling shutters, sliding down glass, pushing against the small blue house at harbor's edge as if demanding entry. Inside, warm lamplight softened the living room. Two small boys sat cross-legged on the rug, building a lopsided tower of wooden blocks. Their laughter rose and fell, bright and unbothered. Fanny Marvin stood at the kitchen counter, drying her hands, listening to the rhythm of their voices. Then came the knock, not polite, not patient. 3 hard pounds that shook the frame. She didn't move. Another hit, stronger. Her jaw tightened. "Stay there," she called gently to the boys. The next sound wasn't a knock. It was the crack of wood splitting under force. The front door slammed inward with a violent snap, wind pushing past the threshold, rain scattering across polished hardwood. A tall figure stepped inside, coat darkened, shoulders squared, breath steady despite the storm. Kenton Torfey, founder of Torfey Capital Group, a private investment firm known for buying struggling companies and rebuilding them into global contenders. The business world called him disciplined, strategic, untouchable. Right now he looked like a man who had driven too far to turn back. Water dripped from his coat. He shut the broken door behind him. Fanny moved into the hallway, fury sharpening every feature. "How dare you?" Her voice cracked through the room like a whip. The boys went silent. Kenton's gaze found hers first, prepared for slammed doors, prepared for her telling him to leave. He had not prepared for anything beyond her. "I knocked," he said evenly. "You broke my door. You wouldn't answer. You lost the right to demand answers 5 years ago." Each word landed clean, controlled, earned. He didn't step closer. He didn't retreat. But something in his posture shifted. Less command, more tension. "You don't get to show up here," Fanny continued, her voice low but burning. "You don't get to force your way into my life because it's convenient now." "It's not convenient," he said. "Then what is it?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was the first crack. The boys shuffled behind her, curiosity overcoming caution. Fanny felt it before she saw it, their presence behind her shoulder. And that was when Kenton's eyes moved past her. 2 small faces stared back at him, identical. Dark curls resting against smooth foreheads, sharp gray eyes. Still, observing. His breath caught in his chest. The room tilted slightly, not physically but internally, like something long buried had suddenly stepped into the light. The boys looked from him, to each other, then back to him, unbothered, just curious. He didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe. The boy on the left, Lucius, tilted his head. "Mama," he asked softly, "why does that man look like us?" The second boy, Ricky, narrowed his eyes in serious inspection. "Is he related to Uncle Marcus?" he added thoughtfully. Fanny closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the collision she had managed to avoid for 5 years. Kenton swallowed. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation. He had dismantled hostile boards with a single sentence. But this was different, because those eyes were not asking for strategy. They were asking for truth. He stood there, completely still. No defense, no authority, no calculated line ready to deploy. His mind, usually sharp, efficient, decisive, emptied. He had come ready to argue, ready to demand answers, ready to confront betrayal. Instead, he found himself staring at 2 living reflections of a life he had walked away from. And for the first time in his adult life, Kenton Torfey had no control over the moment unfolding in front of him. No one spoke. Lucius stood slowly, brushing his hands on his jeans. Ricky followed. They moved closer to their mother, pressing lightly against her legs, eyes still fixed on the stranger. Kennon's throat tightened. 5 years, 5 years of growth, 5 years of first words, first steps, first scraped knees, gone. Not because he didn't care, because he didn't know. And now he was standing in the middle of everything he had missed. Fanny's voice cut through the quiet. "You need to leave." He looked at her, then at them, then back at her. And something in his expression changed. Not anger, not pride, recognition, attention. This was the moment the most disciplined man in American finance lost his footing. Relate. Have you ever walked into a room and realized your absence had consequences you couldn't undo? Engage, he believed success could secure every future. He just hadn't realized which future he was sacrificing. Stay with me, because the man who forced his way into that house would not walk out the same. Fanny stepped slightly in front of the boys. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice steadier now. "Do what?" His voice was lower. "Act shocked." "I'm not acting." Her eyes searched his face. And for the first time since he entered, she saw it clearly. He hadn't known. That realization landed heavier than anger. If you've ever seen a moment change someone instantly, not slowly, not over years, but in a single breath, you understand what just happened here. And if you believe accountability matters more than power, go ahead and show that support now. Because this story isn't about a billionaire forcing his way in. It's about what he did when he finally understood what he had lost. Fanny's hand rested protectively on her son's shoulders. Kenton's voice came out quieter than before. How old are they? 5. The number hit harder than any accusation could have. He did the math without meaning to, and suddenly the past 5 years weren't abstract time. They had faces, names. He looked at the boys again. Lucius met his eyes directly. Ricky mirrored him, cautious but curious. Kenton exhaled slowly. To understand why that single word, 5, broke something inside him, you have to understand the man who believed control was everything, and how he built a life so powerful he forgot to leave room for love. The conference room overlooked Lower Manhattan, 30 floors above traffic that never seemed to slow. A dozen executives sat around the polished table waiting. No one checked their phones, no one whispered. They waited for him. Kenton Torphy sat at the head of the table, jacket buttoned, posture relaxed but deliberate. Across from him, the CEO of a struggling logistics firm was mid-sentence. If we could just secure another quarter, we're confident. Kenton lifted one hand. Not sharply, not aggressively. Just enough. The room went quiet. You've had 6 quarters, he said evenly. The CEO swallowed. The market conditions were predictable, Kenton replied. Your leadership response wasn't. Silence followed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't need to. This acquisition moves forward, Kenton continued. Your company will retain its brand. Your executive team will transition out over 90 days. Severance terms are in Section 4 of the agreement. A board member shifted nervously. That's decisive. Kenton's expression didn't change. Indecision is expensive. No one argued after that. He had mastered stillness. In negotiations, the person who filled silence first usually lost leverage. Kenton understood that instinctively. He let others explain, justify, persuade themselves. He watched, measured, chose his words carefully. When he spoke, it was brief, controlled, final. Assistants adjusted their tone around him. Investors straightened in their seats. Competitors prepared thoroughly before facing him. He wasn't feared because he was loud. He was respected because he was unshakable. At least, that was the story the financial world told. That was harsh, she said quietly. It was accurate. They're going to take it personally. That's their choice. He pressed the elevator button. She studied him. Nothing ever gets to you, does it? The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. Getting to me wouldn't improve outcomes. The doors closed. Alone in the mirrored space, he loosened his cufflinks slightly. His reflection stared back at him. Composed, alert, contained. He had trained himself not to react. Growing up, instability had taught him something valuable. Unpredictability was dangerous. Emotional volatility led to mistakes. Mistakes cost opportunity. So he learned discipline, control, distance, and he kept them. By afternoon, word of the acquisition was already circulating. Torphy moved again. He always does. He doesn't hesitate. Inside Torphy Capital Group's headquarters, analysts adjusted models before he even asked. Department heads anticipated questions before he entered the room. He didn't micromanage. He didn't need to. His expectations were clear. Deliver or step aside. In the lobby, 2 junior associates watched him pass. That's him, one whispered. The one who turned Midwest Freight around in a year? Yeah, he looks calm. He always does. Kenton didn't acknowledge them. He walked with measured pace, acknowledging only what required acknowledgement. Efficiency wasn't just a strategy. It was an identity. Back in his office, overlooking the skyline, he removed his jacket and reviewed performance charts alone. Control wasn't about dominance. It was about survival. He had watched businesses collapse because leaders hesitated. He had seen families fracture because emotions overruled logic, so he made a rule for himself early in life. Control the variables, minimize risk, never let emotion cloud decision-making. It worked. His company expanded into renewable infrastructure, digital logistics networks, and sustainable manufacturing facilities across 3 continents. Investors trusted him with billions. Trust was currency, emotion was noise, or so he believed. That evening, the city glowed beneath his penthouse windows. Traffic lights blinked in organized rhythm. Boats moved across the river in steady lines. Inside, everything was ordered. Neutral tones, glass surfaces, art selected by a consultant, not sentiment. He poured sparkling water into a crystal tumbler and set his phone on the counter. No notifications beyond business, no missed personal calls. He moved through the space comfortably. Alone, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was efficient. No distractions, no unpredictability. He reviewed tomorrow's briefing documents while standing at the kitchen island. At 10:30, he closed his laptop. At 11, he turned off the lights. Precision, routine, discipline. He paused before entering his bedroom, just briefly. His gaze drifted toward the empty space near the window, large enough for a reading chair that had never been purchased. For a moment, something unsettled flickered beneath the surface. A thought, not regret, just awareness. He had built an empire that operated seamlessly without him for short periods. Delegation systems were in place. Emergency protocols were tested quarterly. If he disappeared for a week, markets would adjust. If he disappeared for a month, leadership would step in. If he disappeared from this apartment, no one would notice. The realization didn't hurt. It simply existed. He walked into the bedroom and turned off the lamp. Control meant safety. Distance meant protection. Emotion meant vulnerability. Those rules had carried him to the top, and he had followed them without deviation, until the day he met someone who didn't respond to control, someone who spoke to him without calculation, someone who made him consider that safety and isolation were not the same thing. But that comes later. For now, understand this: before Harbor's Edge, before a broken door, before two small boys with gray eyes looked up and unknowingly asked him who he was, Kenton Torfey was a man who never froze, because he had designed his entire life to avoid situations he couldn't control. He just hadn't realized the one thing you can't model, forecast, or negotiate is the moment you discover what you've been missing. 2 weeks after the acquisition, Kenton Torfey's name appeared everywhere. Financial networks praised his precision. Business journals called him the architect of disciplined growth. A headline scrolled across a morning broadcast. Cameras flashed as he exited a Manhattan building. Reporters called out questions. "Mr. Torfey, are you planning further expansion this quarter? Will you enter the European market next?" He offered brief, measured responses. "We evaluate opportunity based on sustainability. We don't move for noise. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Just steady answers delivered in an even tone." Clips of him circulated online, composed, controlled, strategic. To the public, he represented stability in uncertain markets. To investors, he represented return. To competitors, he represented inevitability. Inside headquarters, the energy shifted whenever he entered. Not panic, focus. An analyst once described it to a colleague. When he walks in, you suddenly want your numbers tighter. Department heads rehearse their presentations twice before stepping into meetings with him. He didn't humiliate. He didn't belittle. He simply expected accuracy. And when something fell short, he didn't scold. He removed it. Projects ended. Leadership restructured. Systems replaced. It wasn't personal. It was structural. Still, people felt the weight of his presence, because he rarely smiled without reason, rarely complimented without purpose, and never tolerated complacency. At a private industry dinner, he sat among CEOs and venture partners in a sleek downtown restaurant. Crystal glasses, polished wood, controlled conversation. Across from him, a tech founder laughed loudly. "You've got to relax sometime, Kenton. When was your last vacation?" "I don't require one. That's not healthy." He lifted his glass slightly. "Health is measurable. Results are measurable. Relaxation is subjective." The table chuckled. It was half joke, half truth. As the evening continued, conversations drifted toward family, children leaving for college, spouses planning anniversary trips. He listened, participated politely, contributed little. When the dinner ended, he left alone. No one invited him for an after-drink, not because they disliked him, but because he never seemed available for it. Back in his penthouse, the city buzzed below. Notifications blinked across his phone. Stock performance updates, strategic proposals, board communications. He set the phone down. The space was quiet again. His footsteps echoed faintly against hardwood floors. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching traffic move in steady lines. Everything in his life functioned efficiently. His company operated with disciplined precision. His finances were secure beyond risk, his reputation untouchable. And yet, the quiet lingered. He had structured his days so thoroughly that nothing unexpected entered them. No spontaneous calls, no unplanned dinners, no arguments, no compromises. He told himself that stability was success. Still, sometimes the silence stretched longer than necessary. The truth is, he didn't label it loneliness. He labeled it focus. He didn't see absence. He saw discipline. He didn't question whether something was missing. Because nothing appeared broken, markets responded. Boards approved. Investors praised. There was no obvious flaw in the system, and Kenton Torfey trusted systems more than instincts. There are people who build everything right, the career, the wealth, the reputation, and only later realize they forgot to build something softer alongside it. If you've ever chased achievement so hard you postponed everything else, you understand this kind of success. It looks solid, it feels efficient, but it doesn't always feel warm. Weeks passed, more deals closed, more praise circulated, Yet occasionally, usually late at night, his mind wandered somewhere it didn't typically go, to a city council chamber, to a woman who didn't hesitate when she disagreed with him, to someone who had once told him, calmly, "You move numbers well. People aren't numbers." He had dismissed that comment at first. Later, he found himself replaying it, because unlike everyone else in his orbit, she hadn't been impressed. She had been steady, and steadiness of that kind couldn't be acquired. It had to be chosen. While he expanded internationally, somewhere else in the country, life was unfolding in a way he couldn't see, but he didn't know that yet. All he knew was growth, revenue, expansion, strategic dominance. He believed forward movement solved everything. If you kept building, you never had to sit still long enough to question what you were building for. And Kenton never sat still, not long enough. On paper, he had everything: power, influence, control. But peace is different from power. Peace requires presence, and presence requires attention. He hadn't learned that lesson yet. The first person who would try to teach him that would do it in a crowded public hearing without raising her voice, and he would underestimate her. At first, the chamber was full long before the meeting officially began. Local residents lined one side, developers and financial consultants lined the other. Murmurs moved through the room in low waves as council members shuffled documents at the front. Kenton sat near the aisle, jacket buttoned, expression unreadable. Torfey Capital's proposal to redevelop the historic waterfront district had already passed preliminary review. Tonight's session was procedural. At least that's what he believed. When public comment opened, a woman rose from the third row, dark hair pulled back, simple blazer, no theatrics. She carried a thin folder and walked to the microphone without hesitation. "My name is Fanny Marvin," she said, voice clear and steady. "I represent the Harbor Preservation Committee." Kenton didn't look up immediately. He'd heard variations of this before. Concerns about heritage, concerns about community identity, concerns about change. She continued, "This redevelopment plan replaces generational businesses with luxury retail chains that don't serve the residents who live there." That made him lift his gaze. Her posture was straight, not angry, grounded. "You're measuring success in square footage and return margins," she said, "but you're not measuring displacement." A few residents murmured in agreement. Kenton folded his hands calmly. When she finished, the council chair nodded toward him. "Mr. Torfey?" He stood, adjusting his cuff slightly. "Preservation has value," he said evenly, "but stagnation has cost. This district has lost 40% of its commercial viability in 10 years. Our plan restores economic sustainability." He didn't look at her while speaking. He addressed the room. "Our responsibility is to future growth." Then he sat. Most challengers wilted under that tone. She didn't. Fanny stepped back toward the microphone. With respect, she said, meeting his eyes now, "Growth doesn't have to erase memory." The room stilled. "You're assuming the only profitable future is one that looks different from the past," she continued. "Have you studied adaptive redevelopment models?" Kenton's expression remained neutral. "We've studied all viable models. Then you know heritage branding increases long-term engagement," she replied without pause. "You're choosing speed over integration." A council member leaned forward, interested. Kenton studied her more carefully now. She wasn't emotional. She was informed. "You're proposing sentiment as leverage," he said. "I'm proposing community as equity," she answered. A few quiet claps sounded before the chair called for order. After the session adjourned, consultants gathered around Kenton. She came prepared. "It won't change the vote. It's optics." He nodded once. "It delays timeline." "That's manageable," his operations director replied. Kenton's attention drifted toward the far side of the chamber. Fanny was speaking with residents, answering questions calmly. No dramatics, no self-importance, just clarity. He disliked inefficiency, and public resistance created inefficiency. So yes, he was annoyed. But irritation wasn't what lingered as he walked toward the exit. It was curiosity. "Ms. Marvin," she turned as he approached. Up close, her expression didn't shift. No nervous smile, no defensive posture. "Yes?" "You referenced adaptive redevelopment models," he said. "Which case study were you citing?" "Baltimore's Harbor Renewal Initiative and Charleston's integration plan. You think those apply here?" "I think you didn't consider them fully." A faint challenge rested in her tone. He almost smiled. "Almost. Email your analysis," he said. "I already did." That caught him off guard. "To your public comment address," she clarified. 3 days ago." He paused. "I'll review it. I expect you will." There was no sarcasm, just certainty. Most people, after confronting him publicly, softened when he addressed them privately. She didn't. She met his gaze without defiance and without deference. "You're not the villain here," she added, adjusting her folder under her arm. "But you are responsible for the outcome. I'm responsible to shareholders. You're responsible to impact, she corrected gently. He considered responding, didn't. Instead, he studied her as if recalculating something. What do you do outside committees? He asked. I run a community planning nonprofit, and you think that qualifies you to critique billion-dollar infrastructure decisions? I think listening qualifies me to critique them. He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded once. Good evening, Ms. Marvin. Good evening, Mr. Torphy. She left before he could add anything else. He watched her walk toward the exit, no glance back, no visible triumph, no lingering. Most debates ended with one party seeking confirmation that they had landed their point. She didn't. She simply stated it. That unsettled him more than disagreement ever could. On the ride back to his office, her words replayed. Growth doesn't have to erase memory. He dismissed it at first. Emotionally framed arguments often appealed to counsel optics, but the data she referenced. He opened his tablet and searched the email archive. There it was. 3 days prior. Subject line, Integrated Redevelopment Proposal, Harbor District. He read it fully this time. The modeling was solid. Community retention rates correlated with sustained revenue streams. Long-term brand loyalty improved occupancy rates. She wasn't arguing against profit. She was arguing for a different route toward it. That was new. The next morning during internal planning, he adjusted one line item. Pause demolition schedule for Sector C, he instructed. His operations director frowned. Delay costs us. Integration may gain more. It was a small shift. No public announcement. No acknowledgement of her influence. But it was a response. She agreed. Not excited. Not triumphant. Just available. And when they met again, across a small conference table instead of a council podium, the tension felt different. Not adversarial. Measured. He listened longer than he spoke. She spoke without performing. He challenged her data. She countered with clarity. Neither conceded easily. Neither dominated. Something unexpected formed in that exchange. Not attraction. Not yet. Recognition. For the first time in years, someone engaged him without agenda. Without fear. Without flattery. And that, more than any public challenge, interrupted his certainty. Because certainty depends on the belief that your framework is complete. Fanny Marvin didn't dismantle his framework. She expanded it. And he didn't know whether to resist that or lean toward it. The third time they met, it wasn't scheduled at all. He had asked for revised projections. She had sent them. Instead of responding with comments, he showed up at her nonprofit office late on a Tuesday afternoon. The space was modest. Brick walls, long shared tables, maps pinned neatly to cork boards. 2 volunteers were discussing zoning charts near the window. Fanny looked up from her laptop when he entered. You don't usually visit other people's offices, she observed. I needed clarification. You could have called. I preferred context. She gestured toward an empty chair across from her desk. Then sit, he did. No assistant, no legal team, no prepared presentation. Just him. She turned her screen slightly so he could see it. I adjusted the occupancy forecast to include phased integration, she said. It reduces initial profit margins, but increases 5-year retention. He leaned forward, studying the figures carefully. Your cost assumptions for renovation are conservative. I'd rather underpromise. That's not common. It should be. He glanced at her, then back at the numbers. They went line by line. He questioned projections. She defended them. When he disagreed, she countered without flinching. When she didn't know something, she admitted it and recalculated. No defensiveness, no ego, just engagement. At one point, he challenged a revenue model she'd built. This occupancy growth is optimistic. It's realistic if the community remains invested. Invested how? She leaned back in her chair. By feeling seen. That's abstract. It's measurable. How? Return visits, lease renewals, referrals. He considered that. You've done this before, he said. Yes, and it worked. Yes. There was no triumph in her tone, just certainty. He noticed that. Most people, when presenting to him, tried to impress. She tried to persuade. There was a difference. An hour passed without either of them realizing it. At some point, one of her volunteers brought tea and quietly left it on the desk. Kenton didn't touch his, but he noticed the gesture, the familiarity of the space. People moved comfortably around her. She wasn't feared here. She was trusted. You run this place without hierarchy? He asked, watching the volunteers collaborate across the room. There's structure, she said, but not intimidation. Intimidation produces results, short term. He looked at her directly. You don't believe in pressure. I believe in responsibility. Without pressure, people underperform. Under fear, people disengage. Their eyes held. Neither softened the statement, neither escalated it. He found himself leaning back, studying her in a way that had nothing to do with redevelopment. You're very certain, he said again, quieter this time. I prepare. The faintest smile touched his mouth. You keep saying that because it matters. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, not strained, just thoughtful. You don't try to impress me, he said finally. I'm not applying for a job. And you're not intimidated. Should I be? He considered the question seriously. No, then I won't be. That did something unexpected. Inside him, it steadied him. For years, people had adjusted around him. Voices softened, opinions filtered, disagreements diluted. She didn't dilute anything. More present, more attentive. He stood and walked toward the window overlooking the street below. Children were crossing with backpacks, laughing as they headed home from school. You assume my approach lacks humanity, he said without turning around. I assume your approach prioritizes scale, she replied, and scale is necessary. Yes, he turned back to face her, but so is care, she added. The word lingered. Care. He hadn't used that word in a business context in years. Care doesn't appear on quarterly reports, he said. No, she agreed softly. It appears in longevity. Their gazes locked again. There was no flirtation in the air, but there was something else, respect. And respect, when mutual, carries its own gravity. He stepped closer to her desk. I'm revising the redevelopment framework, he said. She blinked. Fully? Phased integration, advisory partnership with your nonprofit. She studied him carefully. Why? Because your projections are sound. That's not the only reason. He didn't answer immediately. He wasn't used to being examined. After a moment, he said quietly, because you're right about continuity. She watched him for signs of irony. There were none. Most men in your position don't adjust publicly, she said. I don't adjust publicly. Her brow lifted slightly. I adjust effectively. A small smile curved her lips. That's honest. He found himself watching that smile longer than necessary. Not because it was dramatic, because it was unguarded, and unguarded expressions weren't common in his world. You're not what I expected, she said. Disappointing? No. Good. The corner of his mouth shifted again, almost amusement. Something in the room had changed. The conversation no longer felt like debate, it felt like discovery. You know, she said, glancing at the papers scattered across her desk, you don't always have to win. He held her gaze steadily. I don't compete without purpose. And what's the purpose here? He hesitated. That was new. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. The admission surprised both of them. He rarely entered conversations without a defined objective. Yet here he was, staying longer than required, asking questions he didn't need answered for business reasons. She stood then, closing her laptop gently. Well, she said, for today, the purpose is coffee. There's a place down the block that makes decent espresso. He checked his watch instinctively. She noticed. You don't have to, she added. I know your calendar probably has 15 other things. I can reschedule. Can you? Yes. The word carried more weight than expected. It was choice. They stepped out onto the sidewalk together. No entourage, no press, just two people walking side by side. He matched her pace without thinking. She spoke about the district's history, not dramatically, just informatively. Families who had owned storefronts for decades, seasonal festivals that brought visitors, the way certain buildings had survived economic downturns because residents rallied behind them. He listened, not to counter, to absorb. At one point she glanced at him. You're quiet. I'm considering. That's new? He looked at her sideways. Not often in this way. And what way is that? Without calculating leverage, she slowed slightly. That's a start. They reached the cafe. Before entering, he paused. You didn't try to undermine me publicly, he said. I tried to hold you accountable. And now I'm curious. About what? If the man who runs Torfy Capital is capable of running something personal with the same discipline. He held her gaze. And if he isn't, then he'll lose something more important than a district. The words weren't dramatic. They were measured, honest. He felt them settle somewhere deeper than boardroom logic. For the first time in years, Kenton Torfy wasn't certain of the outcome of a conversation. And instead of discomfort, he felt something close to anticipation. The coffee shop was small, warm, and slightly crowded. The kind of place where baristas remembered names and orders without writing them down. Fanny greeted the woman behind the counter with familiarity. 2 espresso, she said, glancing at Kenton. Still black? Yes. They found a table near the window. Outside, late afternoon light filtered across the sidewalk. Inside, conversations hummed gently around them. This isn't your usual environment, she said, stirring her cup. He scanned the room briefly. Worn wooden tables, students with laptops, a retired couple sharing a pastry. It's functional, he replied. She smiled faintly. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. It's different. Different good or different tolerable? He paused before answering. Undetermined, she laughed quietly. That sound again, unforced, natural. It didn't feel like performance. It felt like ease. He found himself relaxing slightly in response. You measure everything, she said. Even experiences. I evaluate that must be exhausting. It prevents mistakes, or prevents spontaneity. He considered that. Spontaneity creates inefficiency. Sometimes it creates connection. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the way she held her cup, steady, relaxed. No guarded movements, no calculation in her posture. You're comfortable here, he observed. I built my life here. You could scale it. I don't need to. He studied her. You don't want more? I want meaningful. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him, not because it was naive, but because it was clear. He was used to ambition being loud, expansive, aggressive. Hers was rooted. He shifted the conversation slightly. Your nonprofit could expand statewide. It could. Why hasn't it? Because I don't want to manage something I can't stay present in. The word present lingered. You think scale removes presence? He asked. It can, and that matters to you. Yes. He leaned back, absorbing that. Presence. It wasn't a metric he tracked. He wasn't checking his phone. He hadn't thought about the markets in the past 20 minutes. He wasn't anticipating the next meeting. He was here, fully. The realization was unfamiliar. You're quiet, she said gently. I'm listening. That's new. He didn't deny it. Outside, a group of teenagers ran past, laughing loudly. One of them bumped into the cafe window accidentally, then waved apologetically inside. Fanny waved back. He noticed. You engage easily, he said. It's not difficult. For you, it doesn't have to be difficult for you either. He held her gaze. You assume I struggle with that. I assume you prioritize differently, and you think I should reprioritize? I think you should examine why you avoid certain things. His jaw tightened slightly. I don't avoid. You deflect. The word landed sharper than expected. I'm here, aren't I? He said. Yes, she replied softly. You are. There was no accusation in her tone, just acknowledgement, and that diffused the tension instantly. He exhaled slowly. You don't treat me like I'm fragile, he said. You're not. You also don't treat me like I'm untouchable. You're not that either. He almost smiled. You've decided a lot about me. I've observed. And your conclusion? She hesitated, studying him more carefully now. You've built a life that protects you. From what? Disappointment. The word settled heavily. He didn't respond immediately, because the instinct was to correct her, to explain, to redirect, but something held him still. Instead, he asked, You don't protect yourself? I do. How? I choose people carefully, and you chose to challenge me. Yes. Why? Because I saw something worth challenging. He absorbed that in silence. No one had framed him that way before. Worth challenging, not intimidating, not powerful. Worth engaging. The barista called out an order across the room. The sound of milk steaming filled the brief pause. You assume I need disruption, he said. I assume you're capable of growth. I grow constantly, financially, and otherwise. She didn't push the point. She didn't need to. The question hung there on its own. He glanced around the cafe again, at the couples leaning toward each other in quiet conversation, at friends sharing stories across small tables. Do you ever get tired of staying small? He asked. I'm not small. I meant scale. I know what you meant. Her tone remained even. I don't measure my impact by expansion, she continued. I measure it by depth. And if depth limits you, it doesn't. How do you know? Because I sleep well. The answer surprised him. Not because it was defensive, because it was peaceful. Sleep well. When was the last time he'd described his own rest that way? He didn't lack sleep, but it was structured, scheduled, optimized. Not peaceful. You think I don't sleep well, he said. I think you're always planning. He couldn't deny that. He was. Even now, part of his mind tracked time, commitments, outcomes. Yet another part, the part sitting across from her, didn't want to leave. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. Disappointing, she echoed from earlier. No, good. Silence returned, but it felt different now, less analytical, more aware. He realized something then, subtle but undeniable. He wasn't trying to persuade her anymore. He wasn't defending his model. He wasn't proving anything. He was simply present, and presence required letting go of control even slightly. When they finally stood to leave, he didn't check his phone immediately. He waited as she thanked the barista, waited as she greeted someone near the door. Outside, the air had cooled. They walked slowly back toward her office. "You don't have to solve everything," she said as they reached the corner. "I don't try to solve everything. You try to manage it. That's different." "Is it?" He considered that. She stopped walking. "You don't have to answer now," she added gently. "Just consider it." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. "I am," he said, and for the first time in years, Kenton Torphy wasn't thinking about acquisition timelines or growth charts. He was thinking about a conversation, about a woman who didn't seek to impress him. As she stepped back toward her building entrance, she paused. "Do you ever get tired of winning?" she asked softly. The question landed differently this time. He didn't answer immediately, because for once he didn't have one prepared. He didn't answer her question that day, but it followed him home. "Do you ever get tired of winning?" The words echoed in the quiet of his penthouse that night as he stood near the window overlooking the city. Traffic lights blinked below. A helicopter crossed the skyline in a slow arc. Winning had always meant security. Security meant survival. Survival meant control. He loosened his tie, setting it carefully on the marble counter. For years the formula had worked, every decision calculated, every risk measured, every expansion deliberate. Yet her question implied something else, that winning might cost something, that constant forward motion might leave something behind. He dismissed the thought at first, then reopened his laptop, not to review markets, to reread her redevelopment proposal. He studied it differently this time, not for weaknesses, not for negotiation leverage, for intent. Her numbers were solid, conservative but thoughtful, structured around sustainability rather than rapid turnover. She wasn't against growth, she was against erasure. The distinction mattered more than he had admitted. The next morning, during the executive strategy call, he made a decision that startled even himself. "We're restructuring the Harbor District plan," he said calmly. His operations director blinked. "Restructuring how?" "Phased redevelopment, preservation integration, advisory partnership with a local nonprofit." There was a pause on the line. "That slows profit realization," the CFO noted carefully. "It strengthens long-term stability," Kenton replied. Another silence. "Is this about public pressure?" someone asked. No, he didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The adjustment wasn't emotional, it was deliberate. But beneath that deliberation was something new. Consideration. That afternoon, he drove back to Harbor Street without scheduling a meeting. He told himself it was to observe the district again. He parked 2 blocks away and walked the length of the waterfront alone. The bakery was open. The owner stood outside speaking to customers. Children ran past with ice cream cones, laughing. He watched without analyzing foot traffic or lease potential. Just watched. When he stepped into the bakery, the bell above the door chimed lightly. The owner looked up. "You're the developer," the man said cautiously. "I am." The man wiped his hands on his apron. "You here to measure the walls? I'm here to buy bread." The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. Kenton selected a loaf without rushing. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 42 years. Business stable?" "Stable enough." There was pride in the man's voice. Not arrogance. Pride. Kenton paid, declined change, and left. Outside, he stood still for a moment, holding the warm paper bag. This was what she meant. Continuity, not resistance to growth. Anchoring it. Later that week, he met Fanny again, this time at her suggestion, on her porch overlooking the quieter side of the district. String lights were draped loosely along the railing. The evening air carried a gentle breeze. "You look thoughtful," she said as he stepped onto the porch. "I am. That's new." He almost smiled. "I visited the bakery." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Voluntarily?" "Yes. And?" "He's been there 42 years. I know. He's profitable. I know. He doesn't want to leave. I know." He studied her carefully. "You already anticipated all of that." "Yes." He leaned against the railing. "You assume I've never considered these details. I assume you consider them differently. How? As variables, not as lives." The honesty could have irritated him. Instead, it grounded him. "You're not entirely wrong," he admitted. She watched him closely. "That's not something you say often, is it?" "No." They stood in quiet for a moment. He noticed the way the light softened across the street, the way the sound of distant traffic blended with conversation from neighboring homes. It was calm, not silent, alive. "You asked me if I get tired of winning," he said finally. She nodded. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, resting her hands lightly on the railing beside him. "Maybe you don't need to stop," she said gently. He looked at her. "Maybe you need to decide what you're winning for." The The simplicity of it struck deeper than any challenge she'd given him in public. What are you winning for? He'd always defined success by scale, market share, influence, expansion. But those metrics didn't answer her question. He turned slightly toward her. And what are you winning for? He asked. She didn't hesitate. Impact that lasts longer than headlines. There was no self-importance in her tone, just clarity. He admired that, more than he expected. Over the next several weeks, subtle changes began to appear in his routine. He declined a late-night networking event to attend a community planning session with her. He rescheduled a strategy dinner to walk the district during a local festival. He listened more in meetings, interrupting less. His executive team noticed. You seem different, his legal officer commented after one meeting. Clarify, more deliberate. He almost corrected her, then realized she wasn't wrong. He was deliberate, just not only about numbers anymore. One evening, after a long day, he arrived at her porch again. This time without documents, without agenda. She handed him a glass of iced tea. You didn't bring spreadsheets, she noted. No, that's progress. He leaned back in the chair beside her. They talked about ordinary things that night. Childhood stories, travel memories, moments of failure. He admitted losing a major deal early in his career because he overestimated a partner's loyalty. She admitted nearly closing her nonprofit during its first year because funding dried up unexpectedly. You didn't quit, he said. No. Why? Because it mattered. He looked at her steadily. You matter to what you build, she added softly. And you. I don't build alone. The implication lingered gently between them. He didn't rush to define it. For once, he let it exist without controlling it. As the evening grew darker, he reached up absent-mindedly and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The gesture was slow, intentional, not possessive. Her breath caught slightly, but she didn't step back. You're changing, she said quietly. I'm considering, he replied. She smiled faintly. That's a start. And somewhere between boardroom precision and porch-light conversations, Kenton Torphy began loosening the rigid edges of the life he had built. Not dramatically, not recklessly, but deliberately. Because for the first time, winning didn't feel complete unless someone was standing beside him when it happened. And that realization was both exhilarating and dangerous. The expansion proposal arrived on a Thursday morning. It wasn't unexpected. Torphy Capital had been quietly positioning itself for international logistics infrastructure for months. This was the final piece, a full-scale overseas acquisition that would anchor the firm globally. 12 months abroad, on-site leadership required, no delegation possible. When the board approved it unanimously, congratulations filled the room. This changes everything, his CFO said. It expands us permanently, another added. Kenton nodded, absorbing the weight of it. Expansion had always been the goal. Bigger reach, stronger foothold, strategic dominance. This was the kind of opportunity he had built his entire career toward. Yet that evening, as he drove toward Harbor Street instead of back to the city, the victory felt quieter than expected. Fanny was sitting on the porch steps when he arrived, reviewing notes under the soft glow of the string lights. You're late, she said lightly, glancing at her watch. Board ran long. Good news? Yes. She closed her folder and gave him her full attention. Tell me. He stood in front of her instead of sitting down. We secured the overseas expansion. Her expression warmed immediately. That's huge. It requires relocation. The warmth shifted. Not gone, just recalibrated. For how long, she asked. 1 year. Possibly more. The porch grew still. She stood slowly. You'd move? She clarified. Yes. And what does that mean for us? He had anticipated the question. It means I'll travel back regularly. We'll manage the distance. She studied him carefully. Manage? Yes. Like a portfolio? He exhaled quietly. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? It's 1 year. That's not the question. He stepped closer. This positions the firm for global stability. I'm not asking about the firm. He paused. Silence stretched between them, not angry but fragile. You knew ambition was part of my life, he said. I do. And this is the next step. For you. The distinction landed heavily. For us, he corrected. She shook her head gently. No. For you. He felt irritation flicker, subtle but present. Why does this sound like an ultimatum? It's not. Then what is it? She looked at him, really looked at him, as if weighing every word carefully. I won't compete with your ambition, she said softly. He frowned. You're not competing. It feels like I am. That's perception. That's reality. Her voice remained calm, but there was a tremor underneath. I want to be chosen, she continued. Not accommodated. I am choosing us. No, she said gently. You're choosing growth. I'm hoping I fit into it. The words struck harder than raised voices ever could. You think I'd abandon this? He asked. I think you don't see what you're asking me to accept. And what is that? To wait. He opened his mouth, then closed it. She wasn't accusing him. She wasn't dramatic. She was steady, which made it harder to dismiss. You've adjusted for me before, he said. Yes, and I'm adjusting now. Are you? She asked. He hesitated. In his mind, he was offering compromise, visits, calls, scheduled time. In her mind, he was prioritizing elsewhere. The difference wasn't loud. It was fundamental. When do you leave? She asked quietly. 3 weeks, she nodded once. That's fast. It has to be, for the company, yes, and for you. He didn't deny it, because it was true. Opportunity windows didn't wait. Timing mattered. Speed mattered. And slowing down risked losing position. He reached for her hand. I don't want to lose this. Then don't. Come with me. The offer surprised even him. Her brows lifted slightly. And my work? You can rebuild there. My community? You'll build new one. My life? It's adaptable. She withdrew her hand gently. You see everything as movable, she said, because most things are... I'm not... The quiet conviction in her voice settled between them. You're asking me to uproot everything I value, she continued, so you don't have to delay what you value. That's not fair. It's accurate. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of agitation. This is temporary. 1 year is not temporary. When you're building something real. He stepped back slightly. You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to be honest about what you're choosing. The difference again. Subtle, but sharp. I can't postpone this, he said finally. I know, and I won't apologize for ambition. I'm not asking you to... Then what are you asking? She held his gaze steadily. I'm asking whether you see me as part of your future, or as something you'll revisit when it's convenient. The question wasn't loud. It was devastatingly clear. He wanted to say the right thing, the reassuring thing, but reassurance required certainty, and certainty in that moment belonged to expansion. I see you in my future, he said, but not in this decision. He didn't respond, because she wasn't wrong. The porch felt smaller suddenly. The lights above them seemed dimmer. I won't compete with your ambition, she repeated quietly. I won't beg for priority. You're not begging. I won't position myself beneath your schedule. He stepped closer again. You matter, then show me. The simplicity of it left him without a strategic answer, because showing her would mean altering timelines, delaying contracts, risking momentum. He had never done that before, and hesitation in business cost leverage. He had built his career on not hesitating. The silence stretched. Finally, she nodded once. I understand, she said. That's not what I want. It's what's happening. He reached for her again, but she stepped back this time, not angrily, not dramatically, just protectively. When do you leave? She asked again. Monday the 14th. She calculated the date quietly in her mind. That's 2.5 weeks. Yes, then we'll enjoy the time we have. The phrasing felt wrong. Temporary, measured, like a countdown. That's not how I see it, he said. It's how it feels. He wanted to argue, to insist. But something in her expression told him she wasn't fighting him. She was grieving something quietly, and he didn't know how to fix it without sacrificing what he had worked toward his entire adult life. The next morning, he left early for a pre-departure strategy session. She didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask her to reconsider. They stood at her doorway, not broken, not furious, just uncertain. I'll call tonight, he said. I know. He leaned in, pressing his forehead lightly to hers. You matter, he repeated. I hope so, she whispered. And when he walked down the steps, he told himself this was temporary. Necessary. Strategic. He did not allow himself to name the fear beneath it. That love, unlike business, does not operate on delayed investment. And sometimes if you postpone presence long enough, you lose more than leverage. The house felt different the morning he left. Not empty. Paused. Fanny stood at the kitchen counter, watching sunlight stretch across the floor in long, quiet lines. His coffee mug was still in the sink. His jacket no longer hung on the back of her chair. He had called the night before, just like he said he would. I'll land at 7 local time, he'd told her. I'll be awake, she replied. They spoke about logistics, flight duration, meeting schedules, apartment arrangements overseas. They did not speak about fear. They did not speak about distance. When the call ended, she stared at her phone a moment longer than necessary. 3 weeks had passed quickly, too quickly. They had filled the days with dinners, long walks, conversations that tried to pretend nothing was shifting, but something had shifted. The morning he left, he kissed her gently at the door. "Just a year," he said. She nodded. "Just a year." The phrase sounded lighter when he said it. He walked down the steps with the same measured confidence he carried into boardrooms. He didn't look back, not because he didn't care, because looking back would complicate leaving. She watched until his car disappeared around the corner, then she closed the door softly. At first, the calls were regular. Time zones required adjustment, but they managed. "How was the site visit?" she would ask. "Productive," he'd reply. "We're ahead of projection." "How's the apartment?" "Efficient." She smiled the first time he described it that way. "Of course it is." He'd ask about the district, the nonprofit, the bakery owner. She'd update him on small victories, a successful zoning vote, a community fundraiser that exceeded expectations. They spoke often, but not deeply, because depth requires presence, and presence is harder across oceans. Weeks turned into months. His schedule grew heavier. International negotiations stacked tightly. Unexpected compliance hurdles surfaced. Board demands intensified. He called when he could, sometimes at midnight his time, sometimes mid-afternoon hers. There were missed calls, delayed replies. "I tried earlier," he'd say. "I know," she'd answer. She never accused, never raised her voice, but something in her tone grew quieter. He noticed. He just didn't know how to fix it without compromising what he was building. One evening, after a long strategy session abroad, he stared at his phone. 3 missed calls from her. His stomach tightened. He called back immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey," her voice sounded tired. "Is everything all right?" "Yes. You called, I know." Silence stretched. "I just wanted to hear your voice," she said finally. "I'm here. I know." He leaned back against the balcony railing of his overseas apartment, city lights flickering below. "Talk to me," he said. She hesitated. "I don't want to compete with this," she admitted softly. "You're not competing. It feels like I am." He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm doing this for the future. I understand. I want you there, but I'm not." The simplicity of that truth left no room for argument. He exhaled slowly. "I'll visit next month." "You said that last month." Schedules had shifted. Flights had been postponed. Not intentionally, but repeatedly. He didn't respond immediately, because she wasn't wrong. "I'm trying," he said. "I know you are. And I don't know if trying from far away is the same thing." Her honesty wasn't sharp. It was tired, and that worried him more than anger would have. 2 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. She stared at the test result in her bathroom, heart pounding steadily but not wildly. It wasn't panic she felt. It was gravity. She sat on the edge of the tub for a long time, absorbing the weight of it. When she visited her doctor the following week and learned there were 2 heartbeats, she didn't cry. She placed a hand over her stomach and breathed slowly. Twins. Life had shifted again. Completely. That night she called him. It was late where he was. The call went to voicemail. "Hey," she said after the tone. "Call me when you can. It's important." She waited. He didn't call back that night, or the next morning. By the following afternoon, an unfamiliar number appeared on her screen. "Miss Marvin?" a professional voice asked. "Yes, this is Daniel from Mr. Torfey's executive office. He's currently unavailable for personal matters due to ongoing negotiations. If you'd like to schedule a call next week." She ended the call before he finished. Unavailable for personal matters. The words echoed louder than any argument they'd ever had. She stared at her phone for a long time, then placed it face down on the table. She could have called again, sent another message, explained the urgency, but something inside her stilled. He had chosen expansion without hesitation. She could choose peace without apology. The decision wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fueled by anger. It was clear. She would not beg for space in someone's life. If he wanted to be present, he would find his way there. If he didn't, she would not chase him across continents. She placed both hands over her stomach again. "We'll be all right," she whispered softly. Not to him, to the 2 small heartbeats inside her. Weeks passed. He called eventually. "I've been buried," he said. "I figured. You sounded urgent." I was... Silence stretched. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Yes." She didn't elaborate. He waited. She didn't fill the space. "I'll be back in 3 months," he said. "We can talk properly then." 3 months. She closed her eyes briefly. "All right. Are we okay?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "We're separate right now," she said gently. "What does that mean?" "It means you're building something there, and you're building something here. And those things aren't aligned." He exhaled. "We'll align them. Maybe." Her tone wasn't bitter, just honest. After they hung up, she stood alone in her living room. The house felt quiet again, but not paused this time, certain. She began making plans, practical ones, relocation to Harbor's Edge permanently, scaling back travel, preparing space. When she packed his remaining belongings into a box, she did it carefully. No anger, no theatrics, just closure. Months later, when Lucius and Ricky were born, she held them close and whispered their names with quiet pride. They had his eyes. That struck her unexpectedly. Sharp gray, alert, observant. She didn't curse the resemblance. She didn't erase it. She simply accepted it. And when they eventually asked about their father, she answered without bitterness. She never added more, because she refused to build their foundation on resentment. 5 years passed like that. Growth, laughter, sleepless nights, first words, first steps. And somewhere far away, Kenton Torphy expanded an empire, unaware that the most important growth of his life had happened in his absence, until the day a single discovery forced him to confront what he had missed, and that discovery would lead him back, to a broken door, and 2 gray-eyed boys asking a question he could no longer avoid. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No dramatic warning, no emotional premonition, just paperwork. Kenton sat in his Chicago office reviewing a regional acquisition report. The overseas expansion had concluded successfully. Torphy Capital's valuation had doubled in 5 years. The board was pushing for another aggressive move into renewable transport corridors. His assistant knocked lightly and stepped inside. "There's a legal document that requires your signature," she said, placing a slim folder on his desk. It was redirected from our old Harbor District files. Redirected why? It references an outstanding land easement adjustment. Minor issue. He opened the folder casually. Most of it was routine. Property boundaries, community trust agreements. Then a name caught his eye. Fanny Marvin. He stilled. The document referenced a residential transfer tied to a preservation grant his firm had once contributed to as part of the revised redevelopment plan. His eyes moved further down the page. Next of kin, Lucius Marvin. Next of kin, Ricky Marvin. The surname hit him first, Marvin. Then the birth dates, 5 years ago. He stared at the numbers longer than necessary. The room seemed unusually quiet. He checked the dates again, calculated backward automatically. The timeline aligned with a period he remembered clearly, before the expansion fully consumed him, before distance hardened into separation. He sat back slowly. "Get me the full file," he said evenly. His assistant nodded and left without question. His pulse remained steady. Externally, internally, something had shifted. Ricky, twins. The thought formed gradually, almost defensively. It could be coincidence. Common names, common timeline. But instinct pressed harder. 5 years ago, 2.5 weeks after he left. The math did not feel coincidental. The expanded file arrived within minutes. He flipped through documentation. Birth certificates attached to residency records. Mother, Fanny Marvin. Father, blank. His jaw tightened. The space was not filled. He read the birth dates again. 5 years. 5 birthdays he hadn't known about. 5 years of milestones invisible to him. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, eyes fixed on the paper. His mind moved quickly, not emotionally at first, but analytically. Why hadn't she told him? He replayed old messages in his memory, missed calls, the night she'd said she needed to talk, the assistant relaying that he was unavailable for personal matters. The phrase returned sharply now. A flicker of something unfamiliar moved through his chest. Not anger, not yet. Recognition. He stood abruptly and walked to the window. Below, the city moved in confident rhythm. 5 years. He had believed the separation was mutual, gradual, strategic. He had assumed she chose distance as much as he had chosen expansion, but the timeline suggested something else. He picked up his phone and dialed a private investigator his firm occasionally retained for corporate vetting. "I need confirmation on 2 minors connected to Harbor's Edge residency records," he said calmly. "Discreetly, personal or professional?" the investigator asked. A pause. Personal. Within 48 hours the confirmation arrived. Identical twin boys, age 5. Dark curls, gray eyes. A photograph was attached to the digital report. Kenton opened it. The world narrowed. 2 boys stood on a beach barefoot, grinning at the camera. Wind pushed their hair across their foreheads. One held a small red bucket. The other clutched what looked like a half-buried seashell. Their eyes were unmistakable. His eyes, not just in color, in shape, in intensity. He sat down slowly. For years he had built projections with precise forecasting, calculated risks with surgical accuracy. Yet here was something he had never forecasted, not because it was impossible, because it required a conversation he had postponed. His chest tightened in a way he couldn't quantify. He zoomed in on the photo. Lucius, Ricky. The names felt foreign and intimate at the same time. 5 years. He had not missed one fiscal quarter review, not one board summit, not one international negotiation, but he had missed 5 years of firsts. He leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on the screen. Memories resurfaced uninvited, her quiet voice on the porch. I want to be chosen. Her missed calls, the assistant's dismissal. He pressed his fingers against his temple. This wasn't betrayal. It wasn't manipulation. It was consequence. He had prioritized expansion, and life had expanded without him. A sharp knock sounded at his office door. Everything all right? His legal officer asked, stepping inside cautiously. He closed the file instantly. Yes, you look unsettled. He rarely did. He adjusted his posture. Reschedule my afternoon meetings, all of them? Yes, she hesitated. Board call included. Yes, that caught her attention. Understood. When she left, he stood again, pacing slowly across the office. He replayed every conversation with Fanny during that period. Her hesitation, her tone growing quieter, the call where she said they were separate. Had she known then? Had she tried to tell him? The memory of that voicemail surfaced. Call me. It's important. He'd been in the middle of a critical overseas negotiation. He had instructed his team to filter personal interruptions. Efficiency had cost him information. He exhaled slowly. This wasn't about blame, it was about action. He opened his laptop again, not to analyze, to search. Harbor's Edge property records, community event photos, local newsletters, images of festivals. In several photos, Fanny appeared at the edge of the frame. And near her, 2 small boys, one often slightly ahead of the other, one slightly more cautious. Even in still images, he sensed difference in personality. His chest tightened again. He closed the screen. He did not allow himself to sit in shock. Shock was passive. He had never been passive. He picked up his phone and booked a private flight for the next morning. No delegation, no announcement, just travel. His assistant knocked again. Your board is asking why you canceled. Tell them it's personal. Do you want to clarify further? No. She studied him briefly, then nodded. When he was alone again, he stood in the center of his office, a space that had always represented certainty. He had built Torphy Capital into a global force. He had expanded into markets others hesitated to enter. He had mastered timing, but he had mistimed something else entirely. And for the first time in years, his next move wasn't strategic expansion, it was accountability. He picked up the printed photograph and studied it once more. Lucius, Ricky, 5 years. He swallowed hard, then quietly said the words aloud, testing them. My sons. The words felt both right and devastating. He didn't know how she would respond. He didn't know if the boys would accept him. He didn't know what explanation would suffice. But he knew one thing with clarity he had not felt in years. This required presence, not management, not scheduling, presence. And the next morning, before sunrise, Kenton Torphy boarded a flight to Harbor's Edge, uncertain for the first time in his adult life. He didn't sleep on the flight. He tried, closed his eyes, reclined the seat, ignored the soft hum of the engine. 2 boys on a beach, gray eyes, unmistakable. 5 years. He stared out the window instead, watching clouds stretch endlessly beneath the wing. His reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, not weaker, not frightened, just uncertain. Uncertainty was rare for him. He usually stepped into rooms knowing outcomes were negotiable. This wasn't negotiable. This was history. And history doesn't adjust itself to fit your schedule. When the plane landed, he declined the car service offered by the local airport concierge. I'll drive, he said. He needed the distance, needed the silence between departure and arrival. The rental car smelled faintly of leather and something chemical. He adjusted the seat, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway toward Harbor's Edge. The road stretched long and steady ahead of him. For the first 20 miles, he rehearsed what he might say. Why didn't you tell me? No, that sounded accusatory. Why did you keep them from me? Worse, because the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. She had tried. The missed call, the voicemail, his office filtering her out. Unavailable for personal matters, he gripped the steering wheel tighter. Personal matters. The phrase sounded hollow now. What could possibly be more personal than this? The highway narrowed as he approached the coast. Trees lined both sides, their branches arching overhead like a quiet corridor. He slowed slightly as the speed limit dropped. What if she shuts the door? The thought surfaced unexpectedly. What if she refuses to let him see them? He could file. He could demand rights. The instinct to control flickered, but it faded just as quickly. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't leverage. It was responsibility. And responsibility doesn't begin with threats. It begins with humility. He exhaled slowly. What if they hate me? That question landed heavier. 5-year-olds don't understand timelines, and he had not been present. He turned onto the coastal road leading into town. Harbor's Edge looked smaller than he remembered, quieter, more intimate. The bakery still stood on the corner, its sign freshly painted. A group of teenagers rode bikes past the storefront, laughing loudly. Life had continued. Without him. He drove past the nonprofit office. The windows were open, papers pinned neatly inside. He felt something tighten in his chest again. This was her world, the one she chose to stay rooted in, the one he asked her to leave. He slowed as he approached her street. He hadn't seen her house in years. It came into view gradually. Blue siding, white trim, a small porch with string lights still draped along the railing. He parked across the street, didn't get out immediately. His hands rested on the steering wheel, steady but tense. He had closed deals across continents, confronted hostile takeovers, restructured companies on the brink of collapse. And yet sitting here, staring at that modest coastal home, felt more intimidating than any boardroom he'd ever entered. Because this wasn't about profit. It was about consequence. He reached into the passenger seat and picked up the printed photograph again. Lucius, Ricky. He studied their faces carefully, trying to imagine their voices, their laughter, trying to imagine what 5 years of fatherhood would have felt like. He had optimized every aspect of his life for success, and somehow, in doing so, had optimized himself out of something irreplaceable. He set the photo down, opened the car door. The coastal air hit him immediately, cool, carrying the faint scent of salt and wood. He crossed the street slowly, each step deliberate, not hesitant, deliberate. He reached the porch. The string lights were unlit in the daylight, but they still hung loosely, familiar. He stood at the door for a long moment. He could turn back. He could gather more information. He could request a meeting formally. But that would be distance again. And distance was the mistake. He lifted his hand and knocked. 3 steady raps, footsteps inside, light, quick. He felt his pulse rise for the first time that day. The handle shifted, then stilled. Silence. He knocked again. "Fanny," he called, keeping his voice controlled. More silence, then her voice through the door. "You shouldn't be here." It was calm, but firm. He swallowed. "I need to talk to you. There's nothing to talk about. There are 2 boys inside, that house." Silence again, longer this time. "You don't get to show up like this," she said quietly. "I know, then leave." His jaw tightened. He had flown across the country, driven hours, discovered 5 years of absence in 48 hours. Leaving wasn't an option. "Open the door," he said. No, the finality in her voice was unmistakable. He looked down at the door handle. The wood was older than he remembered, the lock simple. He had forced entry into boardrooms metaphorically for years, never physically. This wasn't about intimidation. It was about urgency. "Please," he said once more. No, and in that moment, not out of rage, not out of dominance, but out of desperation. He pushed. The door gave under the force of his shoulder. Wood splintered. The frame cracked sharply. The sound echoed inside the house, and then he stepped across the threshold. Rain had begun to fall lightly outside, carried in with him as he entered. Fanny stood at the end of the hallway, eyes blazing. "How dare you!" she shouted. He had prepared for anger, prepared for rejection, prepared for confrontation. He had not prepared for the sight that followed. 2 small boys on the living room rug. Identical. Dark curls, sharp gray eyes, his eyes. One of them looked up first. "Mama." The boy's gaze shifted slowly toward Kenton. "Why does that man look like us?" And Kenton Torfey, the man who never froze, stopped moving, stopped thinking, stopped breathing. Because no boardroom, no expansion, no strategic victory had ever prepared him for this. And suddenly, control meant nothing. The room felt smaller than it should have, not physically, but emotionally. The boys were still sitting on the rug, wooden blocks scattered around their knees. One tower leaned sideways, forgotten mid-construction. Fanny stood between them and him, shoulders squared, breath sharp. "How dare you?" she repeated, lower this time. Not shouting, shaking. Kenton barely heard her. He was looking at the boys. Lucius, though he didn't yet know which was which, had tilted his head slightly, studying him, assessing. Ricky's brows were drawn together, cautious but not afraid. Children don't fear what hasn't been explained to them. They were curious. And that curiosity cut deeper than anger ever could. "Mama," the first boy asked again softly, "why does he look like us?" Fanny didn't answer, because she was watching Kenton, waiting to see which version of him had forced that door open. The executive, the strategist, or the man? Kenton felt something shift in his chest. Not defensiveness, not pride. Weight. 5 years condensed into one unbearable moment. He had imagined this confrontation on the drive, imagined accusations, legal arguments, explanations. He had not imagined innocence. He had not imagined small sneakers on hardwood floors. He had not imagined hearing his own features questioned by a child who didn't know his name. He took one step forward. Fanny stiffened immediately. "Don't." He stopped, not because she ordered him to, because he deserved the distance. His voice, when it came, was unfamiliar to his own ears. Quiet. I didn't know. The words weren't polished. They weren't strategic. They were bare. Her jaw tightened. You didn't answer. The accusation was simple. Accurate. I know. Unavailable for personal matters, she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. That's what your office told me. His stomach dropped. He remembered instructing his team to filter interruptions during critical negotiations. He remembered saying nothing personal was urgent. He had been wrong. He looked at the boys again. 5 years, birthdays, first words, first steps, gone, not stolen, missed. The second boy stood slowly now, brushing his hands against his jeans. Are you in trouble? He asked seriously. The question nearly broke him. Kenton exhaled a breath that felt like it had been held for years. I think I might be, he answered honestly. That shifted something in the room, not forgiveness, but tone. The boys looked at each other briefly. Children recognize humility instinctively. Kenton looked at Fanny. Not above her, not over her, at her. Her eyes searched his face, for arrogance, for manipulation, for strategy. She found none, only shock, and something heavier. Regret. He swallowed, then did something no board member had ever seen him do. He lowered himself, slowly, deliberately, until he was kneeling on the hardwood floor. Not towering, not commanding, level, eye to eye with 2 5-year-old boys. The movement was quiet but seismic. Fanny felt it. The boys felt it. The man who built an empire by standing taller than everyone else was now on his knees. He rested his hands lightly on his thighs, not reaching for them, not claiming them, just present. Hi, he said gently. The first boy blinked. Hi, my name is Kenton. The second boy squinted. Like the mailman? He almost smiled despite the weight in his chest. No, then who are you? There it was. The question he deserved. He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it required ownership of absence. He glanced up briefly at Fanny. She didn't rescue him. She didn't speak. She let him answer. His voice caught slightly. He cleared it. I'm someone who should have been here sooner. The boys processed that. They tracked consistency. You know our names? One asked. Yes. How? He held their gaze. Because I've been thinking about them since I learned them. That was true. He hadn't stopped thinking about them since he saw the file. The first boy stepped a little closer. Which one am I? He studied them carefully. You're Lucius, he said softly, looking at the one who had spoken first at the beach in the photo. The boy's eyes widened. How did you know? He felt his throat tighten. I've been looking at your picture. Ricky crossed his arms. Are you our dad? There was no softness in the question, just clarity. The room went still again. Fanny's breath caught. This was the moment. Not legal, not dramatic. Truth. Kenton did not look away. Yes, he said. The word felt like confession, not victory. The boys didn't react explosively. They didn't cry. They didn't run into his arms. They just stood there, absorbing. Ricky tilted his head. Where were you? The simplest question, the hardest answer. Kenton didn't fabricate, didn't blame, didn't defend. I was building something far away, he said, and I didn't know you were here. Lucius frowned slightly. You didn't know? No, Mama knew. He nodded. Yes, why didn't she tell you? Fanny stepped forward then, but Kenton raised his hand slightly, not to stop her but to take responsibility. She tried, he said quietly. I didn't listen. Silence. That honesty shifted the air again. Fanny felt something inside her chest loosen, not fully but slightly. Because he wasn't rewriting history. He was owning it. Ricky looked at his brother, then back at Kenton. You missed my birthday, he said matter-of-factly. Kenton swallowed. Yes. 5 times, yes. The number landed like a physical blow. Lucius studied him carefully. Are you going to miss the next one? There it was. Not the past, the future. Kenton felt his voice steady. No, he didn't say maybe. He didn't say I'll try. He said no, because for the first time in years, his certainty wasn't about expansion. It was about presence. He looked up at Fanny then, not asking forgiveness, asking permission. What do I need to do, he asked quietly, to earn the right to know them? The question settled into the room. He wasn't demanding, wasn't asserting biological claim, he was asking, earning. Fanny studied him longer than she ever had before. The arrogance she once fought in council chambers wasn't there. The control that once defined him wasn't leading. What stood in front of her now, on his knees, was a man who had finally encountered something he could not dominate. And instead of trying to, he surrendered. The boys waited for her answer. So did he. And for the first time since he forced that door open, the power in the room did not belong to Kenton Torphy. It belonged to her. Fanny didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, really looked at him, still kneeling on her living room floor, shoulders no longer squared in dominance but lowered in accountability. 5 years ago, he would have argued first, explained, justified, redirected. Today he had done none of that. That mattered. But it wasn't enough. The boys were still watching her. Children look to their mother for cues when something unfamiliar enters the room. She placed a steady hand on each of their shoulders. "You don't get access," she said quietly, eyes still on Kenton. "You earn trust." He nodded once. "I understand. Do you?" "Yes, because trust isn't built with grand gestures," she continued. "It's built with consistency. I can be consistent. The words weren't cruel. They were factual." He absorbed them without flinching. "You're right." Lucius looked between them. "Are you staying for dinner?" he asked innocently. The question pierced the tension in a different way. Kenton's instinct was to say yes, but he didn't look at the boys. He looked at Fanny. "I'll do what you're comfortable with," he said. That answer was deliberate, she noticed. "Not tonight," she said after a moment. The boys frowned slightly. "Why?" Ricky asked. "Because grown-up decisions take time," she replied gently. They seemed to accept that. Children are surprisingly adaptable when honesty is steady. Kenton rose slowly to his feet, not abruptly, not reclaiming height, just standing. "What are their routines?" he asked. Fanny's brow lifted slightly. "Bedtime, school, activities." He nodded. "I'd like to know. That's not how this works. Then tell me how it does." There was no sarcasm in his voice. "Only intention." She hesitated, measuring him. "You start small," she said finally. "Short visits, supervised, of course, no promises you can't keep. I won't make no legal threats. I'm not here to threaten. And if they reject you," his jaw tightened briefly, "then I'll stay anyway." That answer surprised her. Not because it was dramatic, because it was steady. Lucius tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, can he come watch me play soccer?" The question landed like a test. Kenton felt it. He didn't answer. He waited. Fanny looked down at her son. "Practice is Saturday morning." Ricky looked at Ken suspiciously. "Are you busy Saturday?" The simplicity of it cut through everything. For years, his Saturdays had been structured months in advance. Board calls, investor briefings, strategy reviews. He didn't hesitate. "I'm not busy Saturday." Ricky narrowed his eyes. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Lucius nodded approvingly, as if that was satisfactory. Fanny crossed her arms gently, not defensive, protective. "Saturday," she said. 10 o'clock. Community field. I'll be there. If you're late," she added quietly, "don't come." He held her gaze. "I won't be late." The boys seemed content with that answer. They returned slowly to their blocks, whispering to each other about soccer positions. The ordinary sound of them playing again felt almost surreal. 5 minutes ago, his entire world had shifted. Now, 2 children were arguing about whether a tower needed one more block. Life doesn't pause for emotional revelation. It continues. He looked around the room, the modest furniture, the framed photos on the wall. In several of them, the boys were captured mid-laughter. In one, Fanny sat between them on the beach, both boys leaning against her. He had not been in a single frame. That absence was visible and deserved. "I won't disrupt what you've built," he said quietly. "You already did," she replied, but without sharpness. He nodded. "You're right." Another pause. "Why now?" she asked softly. "The file," he answered honestly. "A property record. It listed their names. And before that, I didn't know. And you never wondered." Her voice wasn't accusatory, just curious. He didn't dodge. "I assumed you would have told me if something like that happened. I tried." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. He absorbed them fully. "I was wrong," he said. "Yes." They stood there in a fragile understanding. Not reconciliation, recognition. "I don't need you to step down from your company," she said after a moment. "I don't need you to perform guilt. I don't need speeches." "What do you need?" "Presence." The word again. He almost smiled at the irony. Presence. The one variable he had undervalued for years. "I can give you that," he said. "Don't give it to me," she corrected. "Give it to them." He looked at the boys. Ricky had knocked over the block tower. Lucius groaned in frustration. Without thinking, Kenton took a step forward, then stopped, glancing at Fanny. She gave a small nod. "Permission." He walked slowly toward the rug and lowered himself again, this time without hesitation. "What happened?" he asked gently. "He ruined it," Lucius said dramatically. "I did not," Ricky shot back. "It was unstable." Kenton studied the scattered blocks. Maybe it needs a stronger base, he suggested. Lucius eyed him. Do you know how to build? The question held more meaning than the boy realized. Kenton picked up a block carefully. I know a little about structure. Ricky crossed his arms. Prove it. He didn't overtake the project. He didn't instruct. He placed one block at the bottom and paused. Lucius added another. Ricky adjusted the alignment. They worked in quiet cooperation. Fanny watched from across the room. He wasn't dominating. He wasn't performing. He was participating. When the tower stood upright again, Lucius grinned. See? It works. Kenton looked at him. Yes, he said softly. It does. Not relief. Responsibility. Saturday morning was no longer just a date on a calendar. It was a test, not of reputation, of consistency. As he rose to leave, he stopped at the doorway. The broken frame still splintered from his entrance. He glanced at it. I'll fix that, he said quietly. You should, Fanny replied. He stepped outside into the light rain. This time, he didn't feel like the man who forced his way in. He felt like the man who had just been given a chance, a small one, earned not by wealth, not by status. And for the first time since stepping into that house, something settled inside him, but by humility. And Saturday would determine whether that chance expanded or closed. Saturday arrived with clear skies and sharp morning light. He hadn't scheduled anything else that day. Not tentatively cleared, not flexible, completely blocked. His assistant had asked twice if he was sure. I'm sure, he'd said. Now, standing in his kitchen, he checked the time again. 8:12 a.m. Soccer practice was at 10. The field was 15 minutes away. He planned to be there by 9:30, not because he was anxious, because he understood the rule. If you're late, don't come. He dressed simply. Dark jeans, plain sweater, no tailored suit, no statement watch. This wasn't a boardroom, this was a field. When he arrived at the community park, a few parents were already setting up folding chairs. Kids in oversized jerseys kicked balls across damp grass, their energy chaotic and loud. He stepped out of the car and paused. He didn't know where to stand, didn't know the rhythm. For years, rooms adjusted to him. Here, he adjusted to the room. He spotted them near the far sideline. Lucius was attempting to dribble in a straight line, tongue slightly out in concentration. Ricky was arguing with another boy about goal positions. Fanny stood nearby, travel mug in hand, relaxed but observant. She saw him before the boys did. She didn't wave. She simply checked her phone. 9:32 a.m. on time. He approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt the boys mid-momentum. Ricky noticed first. You came, he said, almost suspicious. I said I would. Lucius ran over, slightly out of breath. Did you see that kick? I did, Kenton answered, though he'd only caught the end of it. You kept control. Lucius beamed. Ricky narrowed his eyes again. You're early. Yes, why? Because being late wasn't an option. Ricky seemed to consider that. Good, he decided. Fanny stepped closer. You didn't have to come early. I wanted to. She studied him for a moment, searching for exaggeration. There wasn't any. Just fact. Practice began with a whistle from a volunteer coach who looked barely out of college. The kids scattered into loose drills. Kenton stood beside Fanny, hands in his pockets. He didn't hover, didn't try to coach, didn't insert himself. He watched. Lucius stumbled once and popped back up immediately. Ricky took a shot at goal and missed, then blamed the wind. They're different, Kenton said quietly. Yes, Lucius leads with instinct, and Ricky leads with logic. He nodded slowly. They balance each other. They challenge each other, she corrected gently. He almost smiled. That sounded familiar. Halfway through practice, Lucius tripped again, this time harder. He stayed down a second longer. Fanny noticed. He didn't sprint dramatically. He walked quickly but controlled. By the time he reached the field edge, Lucius had pushed himself upright. I'm fine, the boy declared, brushing grass off his knees. Kenton crouched slightly. Let me see. Lucius hesitated, pride warring with pain, then extended his hand. A small scrape, nothing severe. You're tough, Kenton said. Lucius lifted his chin. I know. Ricky jogged over. He felt weird. I did not, Lucius snapped. Kenton looked between them. Ricky tilted his head. That's not how falling works. Kenton met his gaze. It is if you get back up. Ricky processed that. Okay, he allowed. The coach called them back into formation. The boys ran off. Kenton stepped back beside Fanny. You didn't overreact, she observed quietly. He wasn't hurt. Still. He glanced at her. I don't plan to be the loud parent on the sidelines. A small, reluctant smile touched her lips. That would not suit you. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the boys run drills. Other parents chatted about work schedules, school pickups, grocery lists, ordinary life. He had spent years in extraordinary rooms. This felt more fragile and more important. After practice, the boys ran toward them, sweaty and breathless. Did you see my goal attempt? Ricky demanded. You aimed left corner, Ken replied. Ricky blinked. You saw that? Yes. Lucius crossed his arms. I'm faster. You are, Kenton agreed. Ricky frowned. He didn't say I was faster. You're more precise, Kenton added calmly. Precision mattered. Fanny watched the exchange carefully. He wasn't favoring, wasn't performing enthusiasm. He was observing, learning. On the walk back to the parking lot, Lucius slipped his hand casually into Kenton's. The contact was brief, unconscious, but it hit like a shock wave. Kenton didn't tighten his grip, didn't react visibly. He just let his hand remain open. Ricky noticed and scowled slightly, then grabbed Kenton's other hand. Don't walk faster than us, he warned. I won't. They reached the cars. Fanny turned to him. You kept your word. I will. This isn't a one-time audition. I know. The boys were already arguing about post-practice snacks. Ricky wanted apples. Lucius wanted something louder and less healthy. Kenton hesitated, then looked at Fanny. May I? She studied him. An hour, she said. Ice cream. Nothing more. He nodded. Thank you. The boys cheered like he'd just secured a championship. As they climbed into his car, still slightly unsure, still glancing back at their mother, he felt something settle deeper inside him. This wasn't about redemption. It was about repetition, showing up again and again and again. As he started the engine, Ricky leaned forward from the back seat. Are you going to come next week, too? Yes. Lucius narrowed his eyes. What about the week after that? Yes. Ricky tested him once more. What about when it's raining? Kenton met their eyes in the rearview mirror. Especially when it's raining. Ricky nodded slowly. Okay. And in that quiet car, driving toward a simple ice cream shop instead of a private airport. Kenton Torphy understood something he had never learned in any negotiation. Consistency builds trust. Not speeches, not power, not wealth, just presence. And he was finally ready to practice it. He learned that Lucius rushed through math but slowed down for reading. That Ricky asked questions long after lights out, as if the dark made curiosity louder. He didn't miss Saturdays. He didn't cancel Wednesday dinners. When work calls came through, he silenced them. The first time he declined a live investor briefing because it conflicted with a school open house, his executive assistant thought she'd misheard him. I'll review the recording, he said calmly. Reschedule a follow-up. The board prefers real-time presence. My sons prefer it too. There was a pause on the line. Understood. Word traveled faster than he expected. Within a month, industry blogs began speculating. Torphy unavailable for key summit. Shift in priorities? At first he ignored it. He had always ignored noise. But this wasn't noise. It was pattern. At a quarterly board meeting, one of the senior partners leaned back in his chair. We've noticed a redistribution of your availability. Clarify, Kenton said evenly. You're delegating more than usual. Yes, that's unlike you. It's intentional. Silence circled the table. You built this firm on direct oversight, the partner continued. Stepping back introduces risk. Leadership development reduces risk, Kenton replied. Another partner folded her hands. Is this temporary? He didn't answer immediately, because he understood what they were asking. Is this a phase, or is this change? It's permanent, he said finally. The room stilled. You're stepping down? Someone asked. From daily control, he clarified. Not from ownership. The CFO leaned forward. That will trigger market reaction. Then we manage the reaction. You've always said control equals stability. I was wrong. The admission landed heavier than any restructuring announcement he'd ever made. Investors expected confidence. He was offering evolution. Explain, the senior partner pressed. He didn't give them a speech, didn't reference sentiment, didn't dramatize. I built Torphy Capital to endure beyond me, he said calmly. If it cannot operate without my constant presence, then I failed structurally. That's not what this is about, the partner replied quietly. No, Kenton agreed. It's about presence. The word hung there, unfamiliar in that room. Your personal life is influencing corporate decisions, someone said carefully. My personal clarity is improving corporate structure, he corrected. A long pause followed. Markets won't interpret it that way, the CFO warned. Markets adapt, and if stock dips, it will recover. His voice didn't waver, because this wasn't impulsive. He had prepared succession frameworks quietly over months, strengthened department autonomy, elevated leadership tiers. He wasn't abandoning the company. He was releasing his grip. After the meeting, financial media picked up the announcement. Torphy steps back from daily operations. Power shift to Torphy Capital. Analysts speculated wildly. Burnout, health concerns, political ambitions. He gave one short interview to close the narrative. The reporter asked the obvious question. Why now? He held her gaze calmly. Because success means nothing if there's no one at home to share it with. The clip circulated everywhere. Investors debated. Commentators dissected. But he didn't elaborate further. He didn't mention Fanny. Didn't mention Lucius or Ricky. Some things were not for headlines. That evening, he was at Harbor's Edge, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, while Ricky attempted to explain the rules of a card game that changed slightly each time he described it. Lucius leaned against his shoulder, half listening, half focused on stacking cards into a risky structure. "Don't move," Lucius warned. "I'm not," Kenton said, holding still. The front door was repaired now, stronger frame, reinforced hinges. He had fixed it himself, not hired someone. Fanny watched from the kitchen doorway. "You're trending," she said lightly. "I noticed. Markets don't like unpredictability. I've built predictability into the structure. That's not what I meant." He glanced at her. "I know." She stepped closer. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said simply. "For them? For me." The boys erupted in protest as the card structure collapsed. Ricky glared at Lucius. "You leaned." "I did not." Kenton laughed quietly, a sound still new in its frequency. "Rebuild," he suggested. Ricky crossed his arms. "You help. I will." Fanny studied him as he leaned forward, carefully sliding one card beneath another with steady hands. He wasn't restless, wasn't checking his phone, wasn't distracted. He was here. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, she joined him on the porch. The same string lights glowed softly overhead. "You changed," she said quietly. "I adjusted. That's more than adjustment." He leaned back in the chair. "For years I thought stepping away meant weakness, and now I think refusing to step away is—" She considered that. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes. Of what? Failing them." She exhaled slowly. "Consistency matters more than perfection. I'm learning." She looked at him carefully. "You scared me when you showed up that day. I know. I thought you'd try to control everything. I almost did, but you didn't." He shook his head slightly. "No." She studied his profile in the soft light. "I'm glad you froze," she said. He turned toward her. "Why?" "Because it meant you finally felt something bigger than yourself." The words settled between them gently. He reached for her hand, not urgently, not claiming, just connecting. She didn't pull away. Inside the house, two small boys slept in separate rooms, unaware that their father had shifted an empire for them. Outside, markets continued fluctuating. Headlines would move on soon enough. But here, on this quiet porch overlooking a small coastal street, Kenton Torphy understood something no financial model had ever taught him. The greatest thing he would ever build wasn't a company. It was the family he almost lost, and this time, he intended to protect it with the same discipline he once reserved only for business. Only now. The priority was clear. The shift didn't make everything simple. Change rarely does. The first real test came on a Thursday afternoon, 2 months after the board announcement. Ricky's school called. Minor incident. Playground disagreement that escalated into a shove. Nothing severe, but enough to require a parent meeting. Fanny was tied up in a city planning session she couldn't leave. Kenton was reviewing a sustainability proposal when his phone vibrated. He answered on the first ring. "Yes, Mr. Torphy, this is Harbor Elementary. We need a parent to come in." "I'm on my way." No calculation, no rescheduling matrix, just movement. When he arrived, Ricky was sitting outside the principal's office, arms crossed tightly, jaw set in stubborn defiance. Lucius sat beside him, quieter than usual. Ricky looked up. "You came—" "Yes." Ricky looked almost confused by how fast that had happened. The principal explained the situation carefully. Ricky felt another student wasn't following the rules. Words were exchanged. It became physical. Ricky muttered. He cheated. Kenton didn't interrupt. The principal. He listened fully, asked clear questions, then crouched slightly in front of Ricky. "Did you push him?" Ricky hesitated. "Yes." "Did he push you first?" "No." "Then why did you push him?" Ricky's eyes flicked to the floor. "He said I was lying, and—" "I wasn't." Kenton nodded slowly. "I believe you." Ricky's head snapped up. "You do?" "Yes." Relief flickered briefly, then faded. "But pushing someone isn't how we handle it," Kenton continued. Ricky frowned. But he was wrong. Being right doesn't give you permission to hurt someone. Ricky processed that. Lucius watched closely. "What should I have done?" Ricky asked reluctantly. "Called the referee. Or walked away. That's weak." Kenton held his gaze steadily. "No, that's controlled." The word landed differently. Ricky's shoulders lowered slightly. The principal observed quietly. "Will you apologize?" Kenton asked. Ricky hesitated again, then nodded once. Yes. Not because he was forced, because he was guided. After the meeting, as they walked toward the parking lot, Ricky walked slightly closer to Kenton than usual. "You're not mad?" he asked. "I'm serious," Kenton replied. "Not mad. No." Ricky seemed to relax visibly. "I thought you'd yell." "I don't yell," Ricky thought about that. "Mama doesn't either." "That's good." Lucius spoke up then. "You didn't miss work?" Kenton glanced at him. "I moved it. For us?" Yes, the simplicity of the answer settled something in both boys. That evening, Fanny listened as Ricky recounted the story with dramatic embellishments. Kenton corrected the exaggerations calmly. "He did not fly through the air," he said dryly. Ricky scowled. "He kind of did." Lucius giggled. Later, after bedtime, Fanny found Kenton at the kitchen table reviewing emails. "You handled that well," she said. "I learned negotiation early. This wasn't negotiation." "No," he agreed. "It was leadership." She studied him carefully. "You didn't make it about yourself." "It wasn't about me." That answer mattered. The next test came a week later, an urgent call from the board. A major investor was threatening to withdraw capital unless Kenton personally attended a strategy summit in Singapore, in person. The date conflicted with the twins' school recital. His assistant delivered the message cautiously. "They're framing it as critical," she said. "When?" 2 weeks. Thursday night departure. The recital was Friday evening. He closed his laptop slowly. "What happens if I don't attend? The investor might pull out. And if they do, we absorb impact. Short-term volatility. Long-term, stable." He nodded once. "Then I'm not attending." The assistant hesitated. "Should I tell them why?" "Yes, and the reason is, I have a prior commitment." She blinked. "That's all?" "That's all." When the message reached the board, pushback came swiftly. "This is 8 figures," one partner argued over video conference. "I'm aware. You built relationships by showing up." "I'm still showing up," he replied evenly. "Not there. No. Somewhere else." A tense silence followed. "You're changing the culture," the partner warned. "I intend to." He ended the call calmly. Friday evening arrived. The school auditorium was loud with folding chairs and restless parents. Lucius stood backstage adjusting his too large tie. Ricky paced nervously, pretending not to be nervous. "You'll sit in the front?" Ricky asked. "Yes." "Where I can see you?" "Yes." Lucius tugged at his sleeve. "Don't look bored. I won't." The lights dimmed. The children filed onto the stage. The performance was chaotic, off-tempo, imperfect. Kenton watched as if it were the most important event of the year. Because for them, it was. Ricky spotted him in the front row and straightened slightly. Lucius forgot half the lyrics and improvised boldly. Kenton didn't check his phone once. Afterward, as the boys ran toward him in a burst of excitement, Ricky grabbed his hand. "You didn't go to Singapore?" "No." Lucius squinted. "Where is Singapore?" "Far." "And you stayed here?" "Yes." Ricky looked satisfied. "Good." It was a small word, but it carried weight. That night, after the boys fell asleep mid-story, Fanny found Kenton sitting at the edge of the couch, quiet. "You didn't hesitate," she said. "I did. You didn't show it. I considered the cost, and I decided the cost of missing this was higher." She sat beside him. "Your company will survive." "Yes." "And you?" He looked toward the hallway where their son slept. "I'm finally building something that requires me." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Not dramatic, not possessive, just present. He didn't tense, didn't analyze. He simply stayed still. For the first time in his life, Kenton Torphy understood something that couldn't be calculated in profit margins. Influence is powerful, but presence is irreplaceable. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. Autumn settled quietly over Harbor's Edge. Leaves gathered along sidewalks. The air turned crisp enough for sweaters in the evening. Life moved in small, steady rhythms. School drop-offs, nonprofit meetings, board updates handled remotely. Consistency had become routine. And routine, Kenton was learning, was sacred. Then came the article. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dramatic. But it was intrusive. A national business magazine ran a feature titled, "The Softening of a Titan. Has Kenton Torphy Lost His Edge?" The piece speculated about his reduced travel schedule, his visible presence in a small coastal town, his domestic recalibration. Photos accompanied it. One was taken from a distance, him on the sidelines of a soccer field, Lucius mid-kick, Ricky mid-argument, Fanny slightly out of focus beside them. The article framed it as narrative, the powerful executive retreating into family life. The language was almost admiring, but exposure carries consequence. By afternoon, reporters had begun circling Harbor's Edge, not aggressively, but persistently. A local blogger parked across from Fanny's house. 2 journalists requested comment from the non-profit office. The boys didn't understand at first. "Why are people taking pictures?" Ricky asked, peering through the window. "They're curious," Fanny said carefully. "About what? About grown-up work stuff?" Lucius frowned. "Are we in trouble?" "No." Kenton stood near the doorway, jaw tight. This was his world bleeding into theirs. He stepped outside and approached the nearest photographer calmly. "No photos of minors," he said evenly. "It's public space," the man replied. "It's private children." The man hesitated. "Public interest story, not involving them," Kenton interrupted quietly. There was no raised voice, but there was unmistakable authority. Within an hour, his legal team had issued formal notices regarding the use of the children's images. The magazine updated its digital version, blurring their faces. Still, the damage felt personal. That evening, Ricky refused to sit near the front window. "I don't like them looking," he muttered. Lucius tried to pretend it didn't bother him. But he asked twice whether the camera people would come back. Fanny sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. "This is what I was afraid of," she said quietly. Kenton didn't defend himself, because she wasn't wrong. "My world isn't small," he said. "It casts shadow, and I don't want them growing up in it." He met her gaze. "They won't. You can't promise that. I can limit exposure." She studied him carefully. "You can't control everything." "I know." The words were harder to say now. He had spent a lifetime controlling variables. Yet this, public attention, was a consequence of choices he had made long before he knew about the boys. That night he called an emergency meeting with his communications director. "No more personal commentary," he instructed. "No lifestyle interviews. No features referencing my family. That's going to spark more curiosity," she warned. "Then let it. You're stepping back further." "Yes, this will affect perception. I'm aware. And the cost." He paused. "I've recalculated." The next morning he withdrew from 2 upcoming public panels, declined a televised financial roundtable. "Mr. Torphy will not be engaging in media appearances involving personal matters." No explanation, no elaboration. The market dipped slightly, then stabilized. Life continued, but the incident left an imprint. One evening, as he tucked Lucius into bed, the boy looked at him seriously. "Are you famous?" Kenton hesitated. "Some people know my name. Why? Because I built something big." Lucius thought about that. "Is it bigger than us?" The question landed with quiet force. "No," Kenton said immediately. Lucius nodded, satisfied, and rolled onto his side. Ricky's version of the conversation was sharper. "If people bother us again, will you make them stop? I'll do everything I can." "That means yes? That means I protect what matters." Ricky seemed to accept that. After the boys were asleep, Fanny joined him on the porch again. The string lights glowed softly overhead, familiar and steady. "You handled it well," she said. "I created it. You didn't create attention. I created visibility." She leaned against the railing. "You also stepped away from it." "Yes, not everyone would." "I'm not everyone." She glanced at him. "That's true." He exhaled slowly. "For years I believed control meant expansion. And now? Now it means restraint." She studied his profile. "You would have chased the headlines once, yes? And now?" The honesty in his tone settled warmly between them. She reached for his hand. "Not out of fear. Out of acknowledgement. You can't erase who you are," she said. "I don't want to, but you can decide what defines you." He nodded. "For a long time I thought dominance defined me. And now, dependability." She smiled faintly. "That's a quieter legacy, yes, but stronger." Inside the house, a faint sound drifted down the hallway. Ricky talking in his sleep, Lucius shifting under blankets. Ordinary sounds, precious sounds. The world beyond Harbor's Edge would continue speculating, analyzing, predicting. But here, the metrics were different. Did you show up? Did you stay? Did you protect? Kenton leaned back in the chair, looking up at the dark sky. He had once believed the greatest risk was slowing down. Now he understood the greater risk was missing what couldn't be repeated. And when the next headline eventually moved on to someone else, when the cameras found a new figure to follow, he would still be here. Saturday mornings, school recitals, bedtime negotiations about one more chapter. He hadn't lost his edge. He had redirected it, and in doing so, he had found something no acquisition could deliver. Peace. Winter arrived gently that year, not with harsh storms, just a slow whitening of rooftops and a steady quiet settling over Harbor's Edge. Inside the house, warmth lived in ordinary routines. Boots by the door. Homework spread across the kitchen table. Arguments about whose turn it was to choose the movie. It was during one of those ordinary evenings that Kenton realized something had shifted again. Not in headlines, not in boardrooms, in him. "You're doing it wrong," Ricky insisted. "I am not," Lucius shot back. Kenton looked up from the book. "What's wrong?" "He skipped the line," Ricky declared. "I didn't skip it." Kenton held up a hand calmly. "Let's check." Lucius reread the paragraph, slower this time. Ricky listened, arms crossed. When Lucius finished, Ricky nodded reluctantly. "Okay, you didn't skip it." Lucius smirked in triumph. Kenton watched them closely. "You know," he said evenly, "being right feels good. But being kind feels better." Ricky tilted his head. "That's not always true." Kenton almost laughed. "You're honest." Ricky accepted that as a compliment. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Kenton found himself alone in the living room, not restless, not reviewing spreadsheets, just sitting. He looked around the room, the repaired door, the framed drawings on the wall, the scuff marks on the floor from toy cars. This house carried imperfection, noise, evidence of life. His penthouse in Chicago had never carried evidence, only design. Fanny stepped into the room quietly. "You're thinking," she said. "Yes. Regret?" He considered that carefully. "No. Not even about stepping back?" "No." She studied him in the soft light. "You're different. I'm consistent. That too." She sat beside him. "You know," she said after a moment, "I was angry for a long time. I know. I wasn't angry because you left." He turned toward her slightly. "I was angry because you didn't fight to stay. The honesty was gentle, not sharp. He absorbed it without defense." "I thought providing was fighting," he said quietly. "I didn't need provision," she replied. "I needed partnership." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just reflective. "I didn't know how," he admitted. "I know." He looked down at his hands. "For years I believed strength meant standing alone, and now I think strength means standing with—" She smiled faintly. "That's growth." He glanced at her. "Do you trust me?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back, thinking. "Yes," she said finally. "Not because of what you've said, because of what you've repeated." He nodded slowly. Repetition, consistency, presence. Those were the metrics now. A soft sound drifted down the hallway, footsteps. Ricky appeared at the edge of the living room, hair tousled, eyes heavy. "I had a bad dream," he mumbled. Kenton stood immediately. "About what?" Ricky hesitated. "You were gone again." The words landed like a quiet echo of the past. Kenton crouched slightly. "I'm not going anywhere." Ricky studied his face. "You promise?" "Yes." Ricky nodded once, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Kenton's waist. The hug wasn't polished. It wasn't ceremonial. It was instinctive. Kenton closed his eyes briefly and returned it carefully. Lucius appeared moments later, pretending he hadn't followed. "I wasn't scared," he declared. "Of course not," Kenton replied evenly. Lucius hesitated, then added, "But if he gets to hug you, I do too." Kenton opened his other arm. "Fair." They stood like that for a moment in the middle of the living room, 3 steady heartbeats against his own. No applause, no cameras, no negotiations, just presence. Fanny watched from the couch, something soft settling behind her eyes. This was what she had wanted years ago, not perfection, participation. When the boys finally shuffled back to bed, Kenton returned to the couch. "You kept your word tonight," she said quietly. "I will tomorrow too. And next week?" "Yes." "And when it's hard?" "Yes." He didn't say it dramatically. He didn't swear it like an oath. He stated it like a plan. And plans he knew how to execute. Weeks turned into months. Spring edged in again. The headlines faded completely. Torfy Capital stabilized under new daily leadership. Investors adjusted. Markets moved on. But Harbor's Edge remained steady. One evening during another movie night, Lucius fell asleep against Kenton's shoulder, mouth slightly open, completely unaware of how securely he leaned. Ricky curled against Fanny, whispering commentary until his voice faded into sleep. Fanny shifted gently closer to Kenton. "You scared me when you showed up," she said softly. "I know. I thought you were going to take control. I almost did, but you didn't." "No." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "I'm glad you froze." He turned slightly. "Why?" "Because it meant something finally stopped you." He understood. The freeze had not been weakness. It had been awakening. For years, momentum had defined him. Forward, upward, outward. The moment he froze in that living room, He finally looked inward, and what he saw mattered more than valuation reports or expansion maps. He looked down at Lucius sleeping peacefully against him, at Ricky's hand resting loosely near his knee, at Fanny leaning into him without tension. "The greatest thing I ever built," he said quietly, "wasn't a company." She smiled without looking up. "I know." Outside, Harbor's Edge was quiet. No reporters, no speculation, just houses lit softly against the evening sky. And inside one of them, a man who once believed control was everything, understood that the most powerful decision he ever made was to kneel and stay. If you value privacy, presence, and protecting what matters, subscribe to Mr. Cooper Stories. See you on the next story. Take care.